Welcome to Theme Weavers, your weekly wisdom for weaving yoga themes into your classes to inspire your students. I'm your host, Heidi Kasner. Let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. I'm so glad you're here for episode 96. I am so sorry that I didn't drop an episode last week, and I'm very appreciative to those of you who reached out to me and shared how much the show means to you, and also holding space for me to take care of myself and honoring the fact that I needed a week off. I promise I will get to this week's theme inspiration. But first, I kind of want to be a little vulnerable and transparent about what's happening in my all too busy mind with you all, if you don't mind me sharing openly for a few minutes. I'm really good at holding myself to high standards and wanting everything to be perfect. I don't know if any of you are like this also. I tend to have a plan most of the time in my life. And if the plan needs to pivot, I try not to grip too tight and allow myself to shift as needed, sometimes with a little resistance, but usually I'm pretty willing to make that shift. When Farron and I started this podcast 96 episodes ago, and when I took it over about a year ago at episode 52, I wanted to keep to our promise. We liked alliteration and went with Theme Weavers Thursday. That way we would drop a new episode every Thursday. We kind of liked how it sounded, so we went with it. In full transparency, when I decided to keep it going by myself, when she bailed the podcast and bailed the friendship, I had all of season 3 already mapped out and plans with the myths and with guest episodes already scheduled in and figured out. Of course I did. I was a planner and I created a plan. So it made it relatively easy for me then to keep the Thursday plan going since everything was already planned out and mapped out and ready to go. Then, when I had to stop the third season and take a break after my son's unplanned emergency open heart surgery, I had a choice that I had to make. I could have just ended the podcast right then and there. It would have been a really easy pausing place, frankly. It just would have made sense. Like I just kind of disappeared and it went into the ether of the podcast world. But I thought I had more to give. I sort of half created a plan, which was super rare for me, but I thought I would do things a little bit different this season. I wanted to have 4 or 5 topics that I cycled through to give this season some structure, I guess is what you would say. So week 1, I wanted to do a yoga book club where I read a sutra aloud and then analyzed it on the podcast with what I thought it meant, just like totally off the cuff and unplanned. And you could watch me craft out how it would make it work in real time into a theme and how that would work throughout a class. Week 2, I thought would be a theme that I taught in the last week or 2 before that, based off of a real story or experience that happened in my life. So just a relatable way to share. Week 3 would be a guest interview. And then week 4 was going to be real stories from the yoga room, where each time I recorded a week 4 episode, I would tell you a funny story or a horror story, or maybe even an amazing heartwarming story from the last 10 years of teaching. And then if a month happened to have a 5th week, that month it would be kind of like a grab bag style with whatever inspired me to talk about that week. But for some reason, I haven't done that. I instead just have decided to tell you a theme that I taught that week before based off of my own inspiration to share with you. So that way it would either just, I don't know, make you think about it the way that I shared it as if you were in the room, or so you could find a way to make it your own if you're a teacher. So you could bring a variation to your own community that really shared a piece of you vulnerably and not like pretending that you're me or anything, but just how it inspired you. And that was really working great until last week. My whole house got sick except for me with COVID. I didn't get COVID, although I got really pretty sick with some non-COVID, but COVID-esque style virus that kind of kicked me in the butt. I wasn't getting much sleep. I was still doing all the things I had to do with teaching classes and all the things. And something had to give, though. I had to prioritize. And so I didn't record an episode. That was what I prioritized. Plus, you probably wouldn't have wanted to listen to me with such a stuffed up face anyway. I didn't sound very attractive to listen to. But I skipped it. And I really did think about whether I was going to record again this week. I started doubting the importance of theme weavers and if anyone even really cared about episodes.
I don't necessarily think it was an imposter thing. I think it was an appreciation thing. And I know this probably sounds pretty petty and vain, but I spend a lot of time preparing for the episodes. I record the episode, I edit the episode, I schedule it out, and then find like clips to do for socials and promotions for it. And then remembering to remind people to listen with links and all the things. It's just a lot of time. It really is a lot. And it's so worth it to me if I'm helping either entertain you or teach you something or inspiring you in your own teaching. But it's a lot on top of all the other parts of my job as a full-time yoga teacher and business owner and entrepreneur and mother and music person and all the things. And this is kind of the vain part, or whatever the right word is for it. But I guess the part that makes me feel a little bit yucky, so it is what it is. But Spotify gives you the option of monetizing your podcast where for $4.99 a month, which is something, at least for chromatic yoga teachers, that if you're able to do that, you can track your listening hours as part of your continuing education to move along the different levels of education in the chromatic system. But if you're not a chromatic yoga teacher and you're listening, or you're just like a person that's listening, it's a way to show those of you that listen your appreciation for the time and effort put in to make the podcast, right? I clearly don't have any sponsors. And yes, I can call this a hobby. I guess I can call it a hobby, but I consider it a resource that I put out there as part of my dharma of creating community and as a service to fellow teachers. There are a lot of yoga podcasts out there, but there really don't seem to be any that I found in this niche or niche, however you say that, that I've seen yet. So I thought it was really helpful. But sometimes when I get tired and overwhelmed and people cancel their subscription and others aren't signing up, I just start to wonder if my time is valued and if it's a service that people really benefit from. And I'm not saying this to make you feel pity for me. If anything, I think it makes me sound kind of gross and look kind of bad. But teaching yoga and yoga adjacent activities are my passion and also my livelihood. So I was feeling burnt out and or underappreciated. Womp, womp, womp. Woe is me, right? But I'm being transparent and vulnerable. So here I am. But now that I've shared all that and probably made you not want to listen to the podcast moving forward, I came to the conclusion that being of service to fellow yoga teachers, paid or not, is something that is super important to me. So I'm going to continue. And maybe if I have to skip a week every now and then because life is lifing, I now know that you will hold space and understanding for me. Plus, I've come to learn that most of you don't listen each week when an episode drops. It sounds like from the feedback I got, most of you batch listen every few weeks to a few episodes at a time, like one after another. I try and keep them relatively short for my own time management, but I also try and keep them relatively short because I know that some podcasts are so long that it feels impossible to find the time to listen to them all. You're busy. I want to value your time. So that's where I'm at with the state of the podcast. And I also want to kind of add in, I think that this vulnerable thing about being paid $4.99 a month for you to listen, as gross and petty as that sounds, I think it actually correlates to you as you're starting out as a yoga teacher. I remember those days that people, you don't get paid very much to teach yoga. Am I right? Like if you're a yoga teacher, you know that getting paid for classes at like gyms or yoga studios are not very financially sound career choices. And I can go more into that if you're not sure what I'm talking about. And I don't mean to discourage you, but when you're first starting and you're at a studio or a place where people have been there a long time, they're going to go to the teachers that they know, not the new ones starting out. And so sometimes nobody shows up, or one person shows up, or maybe two, and then four, and then maybe one person the next week, or you get no showed again. And it can be really discouraging and feel like people just don't appreciate what it is that you have to offer. And it can be tempting to want to not teach, frankly, when you're feeling like you're putting all this time and energy into preparation and to teaching, and just people aren't hearing it or taking the value of what you're doing seriously, and you can get really discouraged. But it can also be looked at as a service for yourself to get better at your craft, that things take time to build, longer than we probably want them to, but they do take time. And this is very similar, right? Like I've been teaching for 10 years. My classes have waiting lists. It's wonderful. Like I'm really making a career out of teaching. And I'm so grateful for my community that really sees the value in what I have to offer. But the podcast has not been around as long as I've been teaching yoga, and it's still building and people are listening. And I think that the listenership is great and I'm really appreciative to you. But it's like those early days of teaching again, where you feel like a little bit unappreciated for the amount of effort that you put in, and know that over time that will pay off, but not at first. And I'm kind of in that beginning stage again where it's sort of like, what's the point of me doing this? Are people actually appreciating it and wanting it? Or am I just like spinning my own wheels? So it sounds gross that I shared that with you. Obviously, I feel uncomfortable because I keep calling it gross and petty. But I do think it's a valuable thing for you to think about in the parts of your career that might be relating to now or at one point or another. But I am making a point to be here, and each time I record, I will try to continue being of service to you. And if you want to come on as a guest, please reach out, and I would love to have you on as my guest, so it's not just me each week. And if you feel so inclined to support the podcast, know how much I appreciate it. So I'm here, I'm committed, and I'm ready to weave some themes with you, even if I have to take a week off here and there. So thank you for giving me the space for that. But let's get into this week's inspiration. And just a heads up, this is a big one. It's a bit of an expanded Dharma talk, and I haven't taught it yet. It's actually my plan to teach it this week, but more on that in a moment. So it's the day after the Super Bowl here, and I'm totally not an athlete. In fact, I can't remember if I've talked about this on here before or not. I think I have, but I grew up in a very sports heavy household here in Massachusetts. And I'm not a sports person, and I had to be quiet whenever games were on, which is hard for me because I like to talk. In fact, funny story, which relates to this week's theme, but during the Super Bowl last night, I called my parents on FaceTime to see if they were free to talk, because they're always calling me at times when I can't talk. And I'm like, sorry, can't go, can't talk, or I can't pick up. But of course they weren't free. Our team, the Patriots, were on the Super Bowl. They weren't free to talk to me, but they answered, and I wanted to be funny and make a disruption for old time's sake of like Heidi disrupting them watching the game. That's not exactly what I want to talk about right now, but it relates. It's the Super Bowl is what I want to talk about. Actually, not even the Super Bowl, but I want to talk about the halftime show. And please note, again, this is a very expanded Dharma talk and not one that I plan to do all as a whole. But instead, I plan to pick out one or two parts of it that spark my interest for one class so as not to overwhelm my students. But I wanted to kind of plan it all out and make it bigger for you here to give you more choices if you were to teach it. So buckle up, as this is a lot and you might need to listen more than once to pick out the parts that really stand out and inspire you to want to teach on. I'm guessing many of you might have watched the Super Bowl last night. Maybe not if you're in another country, but especially if you're into football or American culture in any way. And even if you don't like football, it's kind of a big event and kind of social for a lot of people. But regardless of who you were rooting for on the field, and yes, my home team, the Pats, totally lost in a very big way, but they showed up and they tried the best they could, I guess. But something happened at halftime that I felt like was a little bit of a big shift in our culture. And I'm talking about Bad Bunny, Benito. That's what I want to talk about today. I woke up this morning, it's Monday, the day after the Super Bowl, and I read a post on Facebook by a North Carolina senator named Michael Garrett that put into words exactly what I was feeling, but I couldn't quite grasp in the moment. So he wrote about sitting on his couch and weeping after watching Super Bowl or the halftime show. And I realized I wasn't the only one that felt deeply moved and impacted, regardless of if you like Benito's music style or not, or if you speak Spanish or not. But I think a lot of people were deeply moved, and there's a lot to unpack. Because what we saw last night wasn't just a concert. I think it was an act of Satya, of absolute, unedited truth. Benito stood on the biggest stage on the planet and he sang every single word in Spanish. He didn't sanitize himself for the sake of most people maybe not speaking Spanish. He didn't translate himself to make people feel more comfortable. In fact, the Jumbotron had the words in Spanish, not English. He brought the sugarcane fields of Puerto Rico to a football field in California and said, "This is who I am. We are still here." But as many of us were moved by this celebration of culture, this moment where Lady Gaga even came up and danced the salsa with Benito, with Bad Bunny, and Ricky Martin, he lit up the night as a momentary celebratory cameo. It was cool to see him. I haven't seen him in a long time. But there was another reaction happening simultaneously while we were all feeling celebratory and moving our hips and shoulders to the music. So as many of us were moved by this celebration, there was a very loud, very different reaction happening on social media and in the news. The President of the United States called the performance, in his own words, disgusting. He called it terrible and a slap in the face to our country. That's what he said. In yoga, we talk about the kleshas, the veils or colorings that cloud our perception. One of these is devesha, or aversion, the habit of pushing away things that make us uncomfortable or things that we don't understand. When the leader of a country looks at a hemisphere of flags of Chile, Argentina, Mexico, Canada, Puerto Rico, and more, so many flags of all of the Americas, and feels attacked because the language isn't English, that is, for lack of better words, itself disgusting, in my opinion. And I'm sorry if I'm making you feel isolated, but I have to say it. It's a heart that has become so small and so frightened that it sees diversity as a threat instead of a gift. It's the opposite of yoga. Yoga, as we know it, means to yoke or to unite. And when we try to draw a velvet rope around who belongs and who doesn't, we aren't practicing unity. We're, in fact, practicing separation. At the end of the show, the Jumbotron, the big screen, lit up with words that felt like a mantra for our times. It said, "The only thing more powerful than hate is love." Nietzsche said that at the Grammys just the week before as well. And the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali gives us a tool for when we are faced with hate or unyogic thoughts, if you will. It's called Pratipaksha Bhavanam. It's Sutra 2.33. It means when you're gripped by a negative thought, cultivate the opposite. Benito didn't stand on that stage and scream back at the people calling him disgusting. He didn't lead with anger. He led with what we call ananda, pure joy. He handed his Grammy to a little boy who finally saw himself represented on that stage. He blessed every nation in this hemisphere. He spiked a football that said, "Together, we are America." Benito practiced Pratipaksha Bhavanam, whether he knew it all or not, on a global scale. He met the poverty of hate with the abundance of love. He made hate look exactly as small as it actually is, because hate is so small. Senator Garrett made a point that really sat with me. He said, "Our children are watching. They are seeing what we post, what we celebrate, and where we stand. They're watching us. They're watching us to learn, and they're learning the kind of people that they're going to be by our actions." In yoga, we talk about samskaras, the grooves or impressions we leave in our consciousness and in the world. Hate is a samskara that nobody asks for, yet it gets passed down as an inheritance from generation to generation to generation. But love is also a samskara. When we choose to see the beauty in a language that we might not speak, or a flag that might not be our own flag, we're creating a new groove. We're building a world where culture is shared, not policed. On your mat today, I want you to ask yourself, where am I drawing a velvet rope around my own heart? Where am I letting fear make me small? And can I, for the next 60 minutes, practice a love so big that it leaves no room for any hate at all? I realized by talking about this with you all today, I might be taking a risk. And I think that by being willing to take risks, we're being willing to play big. And by shying away from taking a stance of how you really feel about things, you're playing small. And if I were to sit here and try and fluff up how I really felt about the state of things in America right now, I think I'd be playing small. And I don't want to play small. I don't want my kids to play small. I want them to be able to stand up for what they believe without making people who believe differently feel like they're not welcome at the table. Because I think when we shout out alternate voices, we're creating an echo chamber, and that's not healthy either. So I want to call you in if you believe differently than me, and if you were offended or found last night disgusting, I want to call you in so that way you can hear why it is that I think it was so beautiful.
Before we keep going, I want to pause for a quick moment and say that if you're enjoying Theme Weavers, it would mean so much if you would follow the show and leave a 5-star review wherever you listen. It truly matters for the algorithm, and it helps the podcast get recommended to more teachers and students who might really benefit from this work. You can also find Theme Weavers on all the social channels. I try to share short reels and teaching nuggets there throughout the week. There is also an option to become a paid subscriber of Theme Weavers for a small monthly fee. Not only does it show your support, but if you're a chromatic yoga teacher, your paid subscription actually allows you to track your listening as continued education hours. If you have questions about that, please email me at themeweaverspodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to go deeper and work with me online, all of the links are in the show notes below. Check out Theme Weavers Academy. It's a practical course to help you craft more impactful classes with clarity and confidence. You can also explore my book, Energize Your Life, a chakra workbook for personal transformation. And if you're leading a yoga teacher training program, I do offer a half-day workshop on the chakra system and how to integrate it into theming. It's one of my favorite things to teach. And finally, there are my bite-sized yoga programs, short, under 11-minute chromatic yoga classes, as well as bite-sized yoga self-myofascial release. It combines using self-myofascial release tools with yoga. Both are lifetime access. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And let's get back to the episode.
And I mean, I took Spanish class in high school, which was a really long time ago. So I don't really speak very much Spanish. I'm certainly not fluent in it. And I did not catch every word. That's okay. Because I'm calling in the fact that like a huge percentage of people in my country speak Spanish as their first language. And they are very much at home and welcome here just as much as I am speaking English. And the minute that we say that they don't belong because they speak a different language or celebrate a different heritage, nationality, or culture, I am playing super small. And I really don't want my kids to see that and watch that. So I'm taking a risk. I certainly don't want to isolate you and make you feel like you're not welcome in my class, in my barn, in my community, in this podcast. Like if you think differently than me, you are very much welcome. And I want to hear from you too. But I don't want to play small. And I think it's really important to address this and that I address it and how I feel about it, because I do feel that love is the answer here, but I can't stand around and just watch people hate and create barriers and walls. And that wouldn't be me living my yoga either. So here I am talking about things that make me feel petty and small, and also taking risks that I'll be unfollowed and unlistened to. But like, this is really important. It's really important stuff right now. It's too important for me to shy away from taking a stand. So I plan to say variations of that as my Dharma talk in class this week. And I might be taking a risk, but I don't want to sanitize it. I want to show up and make it so that way all feel welcome. Even if you feel differently than me, you're welcome. That's the beauty of this melting pot of the country that I live in, right? We're all coming from different backgrounds and nationalities and belief systems, but can we be together and hold a container for that without making people feel like they're not welcome? And I really hope so. I really do. Okay. So once you've laid out your Dharma talk and your opening, setting the stage with Benito, with Bad Bunny, with the flags of different nations and the idea of unedited truth, you want to start moving that energy throughout the body. So I want to take you through what the class is going to look like somewhat. So first in the warm up, I want you to start in a simple seated position or even child's pose. And as people are beginning to breathe, I'll remind my students that their breath is their primary language. It's the one thing everyone, no matter where you are, where you're from, where you live, where you go, it's the one thing that everybody understands. And I'll say something like, as we move today, don't try to translate your practice for anyone else. If your body is speaking Spanish and the person next to you is speaking French, let that be okay. Don't edit your movements to fit the room. Just be in your own unedited truth. No need to change it to fit into the space. Be you unapologetically in an unedited way. And then as we move into sun salutations or a steady flow, I want to address the velvet rope part of the Dharma talk that I mentioned. So you know how sometimes we hold back in a pose because we're afraid of looking disgusting or messy? Or we push too hard because we think we should look a certain way? Well, in those moments, I want to cue the students to notice where you're drawing a velvet rope around your own experience right now. Are you excluding parts of yourself from this practice? Can you let the movement be messy and beautiful and real instead of needing to sanitize it or make it perfect? Notice where you're drawing a velvet rope around your own experience right now. Are you only allowing the pretty or perfect parts of your practice to count and to show up? Can you let the movement be messy and be real? I think that's like a really important part to emphasize and encourage in your students. And then maybe in the middle of the flow, I want to shift into Pratipaksha Bhavanam. So when we get into the harder holds, maybe a longer warrior two or a challenging plank or side plank or something like that, that's when this concept of devesha, aversion, kicks in. That's when people start to get frustrated or annoyed. So this is the perfect time to bring in Pratipaksha Bhavanam. I'll tell my students that when you feel that I hate this pose thought creep in, which you will have at some point, can you intentionally cultivate the opposite? Can you find one small thing to love about this moment? Maybe it's a strength in your legs or the fact that you're even here. Can that be the thing that you celebrate and you love and you call in? That can be the flip of the switch, the flip of the thought. And then for this class, I want the peak pose to be a star pose into goddess. And those two are like the peak essentially. So I want to have them stand wide on the mat facing the side of the room in star pose. And I'll say something like, I don't know, reach your arms out as wide as they can go. This is star pose, taking up space. And I want you to imagine that you're reaching across every border, holding space for all people in all nations in your heart. You aren't small. You aren't gated. You yourself are the abundance of all that is. And then they'll sink and transition into goddess. And I'll have them bring their hands to their heart. And I'll tell them to sit into the energy of love. That energy is grounded, it's strong, and it's unapologetic. This is what it looks like when we refuse to be small, to play small. You are here. We are all still here. I think that's like a beautiful way to bring it back. And then in the cool down, I want us to focus on creating new samskaras. So as we head toward the floor for pigeon or twist, I want it to bring us back to this idea of samskaras, those grooves in the mind. Every time you choose to be kind to yourself in a pose you find difficult, you're carving a new groove. You're choosing love over the inheritance that you might have of self-criticism. Let's make the last few minutes of this practice about building that language of compassion, of love, of creating new samskaras. And then finally, when we get into Shavasana, I want to let them just sit with that final mantra from the Jumbotron. The only thing more powerful than hate is love. I let them rest in that silence, letting the messy, beautiful truth of their practice sink into their bones. That's the most important part. And perfect because it's Valentine's Day actually this weekend coming up too. So I just want to go back over that because I just gave you a lot of material. And honestly, it's just probably too many themes for one class, but I want you to have a lot to pick from. And I do usually like to stick to one clear thread. So I wanted to give you several options that you can pick one or two that spark your own interest. And that's how you'll be able to cultivate a class around this. So each of these thematic paths that I touched on has a specific phrase that you hear me talk about this every week. They're like breadcrumbs, these phrases that you can drop throughout the class to keep your students connected to the teachings. So I want to walk you through a phrase for each of the different thematic points and how these phrases connect to the different concepts that we talked about. So the first option that you could drop is the only thing more powerful than hate is love. That's your core mantra. It's the headline. It's the big unmistakable message that was on the Jumbotron that you can come back to over and over and over again. Super powerful. Then another phrase that we have is don't translate yourself to fit the room. This is your Satya, your truth. It's a reminder to stay authentic, just like Benito singing in his own language, right? That's that phrase that you can use to connect to that concept of unapologetic truth. And then another one would be yoga means to unite, not to separate. You'd use this to define the very meaning of yoga as a counter to that velvet rope mentality of exclusion. And what I mean by velvet rope is like the VIP section, right? Like you're better than other people. That's the velvet rope that keeps others out. And another is to celebrate the messy, beautiful truth of who you are. This is all about authenticity in that phrase. It's about choosing the real, unedited version of ourselves over the sanitized one that we think we need to show up being in order to fit in. And another is to meet fear with ananda, pure joy. This is a phrase that connects you to Pratipaksha Bhavanam. It's the practice of intentionally choosing celebration when the world feels heavy, right? Cultivating that opposite thought. Another phrase that you could do is to expand your heart until hate looks small. This connects to our perspective. It's the idea that love isn't just a feeling. It's a capacity that makes hate lose its own power. Such a powerful way to make it lose its power. And then, as Benita said, we are still here. You can use that phrase for resilience. It's a nod to the culture and the endurance of all people who refuse to be silenced. No matter what community you're speaking to, we are still here. Another phrase would be, your breath is a language everyone understands. This is the ultimate symbol of unity. No matter where we come from, the breath is our shared ground. It's a beautiful way to connect people that might be different or that are different. Another phrase would be, move with love, not with the need to be right. This is your Ahimsa, or non-harming. It's about letting go of the ego's need to police ourselves or others. And finally, the last phrase that I came up with is, together we are the practice. This relates to the samskara, or the collective impression that we're making. It's the reminder that we aren't practicing in a vacuum. We're building community together. We're connecting together. We're something so much bigger than our own individual parts. And maybe like a meta meditation would work here too, like a loving kindness meditation. But I just want to reiterate, I suggest that if you're teaching this class, that you pick 2 or 3 of these that spark for you. If you try to use all 10 of these phrases or themes, it can feel like a grocery list that you have to get to. But if you pick, let's say, don't translate yourself, and the only thing more powerful than hate is love, then you have a really tight, cohesive thread to pull through the physical practice. Those 2 phrases, you pull through the whole thing. And then you'll want to edit the Dharma talk to focus on those 2 topics then as well. So as to make more sense on why you're picking these 2 phrases to drop throughout the whole class as breadcrumbs. You want it to make cohesive sense from the beginning to the middle to the end. So that's how I plan to use this Dharma talk or parts of this Dharma talk in class over this next week. But I want to leave you also with some closing thoughts, as if you were here in the yoga barn with me after teaching this class. I would be telling you and saying to you that as you roll up your mat and prepare to roll up your mat, remember that the halftime show of your life is happening every day. It happens in the grocery store line, it's happening in your social media comments, and it's happening in the way that you look and talk and engage with your neighbors, the neighbors that are right next to you and the more global neighbors. The world might try to sell you a sanitized, fearful version of reality. The world might try to tell you that love is disgusting or that diversity is threatening. Can you tell by the scrunch of my nose how I feel about that? Not so good. So don't believe them. Don't believe them. Choose the real America, the messy, multicolored, courageous America. Practice Pratipaksha Bhavanam. When you hear hate, speak love. When you see a wall, build a bridge. The internet, lovely internet that brings us together but also rips so many of us apart, might not forget, but neither does your soul. Let the history of your life be written in the language of compassion. Show up in each moment and remember, the only thing more powerful than hate is love. And when you remember that, you'll share that with the person next, and they'll share it with the next person, and it trickles and spirals into a big movement of love. So if this episode sparks something in you, or if you're planning to use one of these breadcrumbs in your class this week, I would love to hear which one you choose. And if you're in another country and this isn't relevant, I bet there's a way for you to make this relevant to you as well. So send me a DM or an email or comment wherever you're listening to the podcast, because it truly does fuel my dharma to hear how these themes land in your own world. So thank you for sticking with me. And even if you missed me last week, thank you for waiting for me. And I really do look forward to our next episode of Theme Weavers together.
Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you next week with a new theme and inspiration to bring to your yoga practice and your teaching. See you next time.